what is an advance directive? What's a healthcare directive? Let's start there. And they're not always the same thing. Sometimes they're synonymous with each other, the advance directive or the healthcare directive. They're not always the same though. So it depends on who you're talking to. An advance directive in general is a legal document that specifically dictates or details an individual's preferences with regard to medical care if they're not able to make decisions. Okay, if they're incapacitated and unable to communicate their decisions, an advance directive is a document that sort of lays those decisions out. The reason that we do an advance directive is to ensure that a person's wishes with regard to their end-of-life care are carried out, right? They're respected and they're followed by those in their family or friends who's in charge of their estate. And they also provide guidance.
You are listening to the Legacy Talk podcast hosted by James A. Jones,
attorney at law and founder of Sound Legacy Law, PLLC in Tacoma.
Attorney Jones is here to talk about how to best protect your family, assets, and wealth, pulling stories from his more than 20 years of helping families and business owners protect their assets, create their estate plans, preserve their wealth, and plan for the future. Nobody wants to think about estate planning, but life has a way of sneaking up on you, and at any moment, something unexpected could happen that will leave you regretting not having acted sooner. So join Attorney James A. Jones in the Legacy Talk podcast, and together learn how to plan for your future today and have peace of mind tomorrow.
Welcome to Legacy Talk. I'm your host, James Jones. I'm an estate planning and probate attorney in Tacoma, Washington. I've been practicing for over 20 years, and my main practice areas include estate planning, probate, and estate administration. On Legacy Talk, we discuss topics surrounding families and estates. Estate planning is often a confusing and complicated topic, but my goal with this podcast is to make it accessible and understandable to those who need it. So if this is something that interests you, I'd appreciate it if you click the subscribe button and like this episode so that you can follow along as we break down the barriers to estate planning. I'm excited to get to today's topic as always. Today's topic is end-of-life decisions, the critical role of advance directives. Because end-of-life decisions are often some of the most important and difficult decisions that we make. So on today's show, we're talking about end-of-life decisions, the critical role of advance directives. So let's get to it. This week's show is not about celebrities and estate planning nightmares. We're not talking about avoiding probate with a revocable trust. This topic, honestly, is not particularly sexy, but it's important and can be one of the most important things to consider in your estate plan. The advance directive or healthcare directive. These documents can literally determine if you live or die. Does that get this topic moving for you? Maybe. I don't know. While other aspects of your estate planning often get more attention, making sure that your healthcare decisions are in place and that you've got directives in place and people in place to help make those decisions is critical. So today, we're going to be talking about how healthcare directives and advance directives integrate with your estate plan and making a complete estate plan. So we talked a while ago. I think one of the first episodes we talked about durable powers of attorney, and we'll talk a little bit about those here today, but mainly about healthcare and advance directives in today's episode. So to set the stage, what is an advance directive? What's a healthcare directive? Let's start there. And they're not always the same thing. Sometimes they're synonymous with each other, the advance directive or the healthcare directive. They're not always the same though. So it depends on who you're talking to. An advance directive in general is a legal document that specifically dictates or details an individual's preferences with regard to medical care if they're not able to make decisions. Okay, if they're incapacitated and unable to communicate their decisions, an advance directive is a document that sort of lays those decisions out. The reason that we do an advance directive is to ensure that a person's wishes with regard to their end-of-life care are carried out, right? They're respected and they're followed by those in their family or friends who's in charge of their estate. And they also provide guidance to both your family members and your medical professionals working with you. And they can be critical. And we'll get into a story that's super famous, and that's when I tell all my clients, we'll get there at the story time of this episode. So what are some types of healthcare directives or advanced directives? Okay. So if you hear like generally what people talk about advanced directives, you'll hear the word living will. In Washington, we call that a healthcare directive. Okay. And a healthcare directive is a document that says if I'm in a permanent vegetative state, right, I am not coming back from being in this permanent, persistent vegetative state or irreversible coma. And doctors have agreed, usually too, that leaving me on life support would only prolong this state and not lead to recovery. That if that's the situation that I'm in, that I want to be taken off life support. Okay? So a healthcare directive basically says, hey, if I'm on life support or about to go on life support and I'm in a permanent vegetative state and 2 or more doctors say that I'm not coming back from that life support stint, that life support would only prolong that state and not lead to recovery, take me off. Okay. Oftentimes you can say, well, I want to have nutrition continue on through a feeding tube. I want to have hydration continue on intravenously or otherwise. Sometimes you can say, well, I want to have, sometimes the document will say that you want to have medicine administered or pain relieving treatment. Typically the ones that I don't have that just because they're usually combined with other documents that we'll get to. The second type of directive that's important to have is a healthcare durable power of attorney. We've talked about durable powers of attorney before in a previous episode. It's in the first 10, I think. Anyway, a durable power of attorney for healthcare designates a person that you trust to make decisions for you with regard to your healthcare if you're not able to make them. And so that's someone that can talk to your doctors. It's someone that can talk to hospitals. It's someone that can authorize treatment, authorize surgeries, authorize different types of medical strategies with regard to administering medicine. That person also, in most cases, can withhold treatment, remove you from life support, those kinds of things. So that person is very important, and we'll talk about how to select that person in a minute. But it's important to have that document so that you can, if you're not able to make a decision, so that you can have someone on your team that can make that decision. We've talked about that before in our other episode, but it's essential. So the reason that you want to have these healthcare directives, why are they important? Why are advanced directives important? Things like a healthcare directive or a healthcare durable power of attorney or both. You should have both. The answer is, should I have one or the other, James? You should have both because they do different things. So the reason that we want to have them and why they're important is because they give you control and they give you autonomy, right? They allow you to maintain the control as to dealing with your healthcare decisions as well as your end-of-life decisions. So that healthcare directive dictates, well, if Bob's on life support and he's not coming back according to doctors, Bob says, take me off life support. And if I'm receiving a feeding tube or not, take me off, right? Take that off. And the other thing that they help with is, and why they're important, not just for you, but for your family and your loved ones. They provide clear guidance to family members and loved ones, which reduces their emotional burden to say, well, I'm not sure what Bob wanted me to do if he's in a situation where he's on life support. Would have Bob wanted to live in a vegetative state on life support if there's no chance of recovery? Or would Bob want me to take that stuff off so he can peacefully pass away? And so not having to put that decision on your friends and family members really makes their life a lot easier and takes away that burden, I think, of emotional decision-making when they're not exactly sure. So these documents, the advanced directives, the healthcare directive, and a healthcare durable power of attorney have to be legally drafted. So these are not something you can write on a napkin. You can't just write on a piece of paper and sign it. That's not going to work. They have certain requirements, and different states have different requirements. They have to comply with the state laws. In Washington, we have specific laws with regard to how to execute durable powers of attorney and healthcare directives. And in order to make them effective, they need to be executed that way. And so you want to make sure that when you're doing a healthcare directive that you follow the execution requirements. And ideally, you use a lawyer to help you draft it. Because it's not just the document. Like, this episode today is not to say, well, go out and get your healthcare directive and you're set. That's a document that you want to have as part of your complete estate plan. If you want to have a full estate plan, it's essential, and it's always sort of included in my plans, to have a healthcare directive and a power of attorney for healthcare involved, so that if something happens to you, those decisions are cleared out, right? They're laid out for those of your family that are going to make those decisions for you. Now, once you get these healthcare directives and advanced directives with regard to healthcare decision-making, durable powers of attorney for healthcare, you want to let your doctors know. Most doctors will say, well, do you have a healthcare directive? Do you have a healthcare durable power of attorney? And if you do, they usually want a copy, right? And they want to make sure that if you've got specific wishes in there, you want to communicate those wishes to your doctor so that they can put them in their records. So if something happens and they're your attending physician, that they would follow that. Or if there's another physician that comes and is looking at your file that doesn't know you, that stuff is in there, right? You want to make sure that stuff is known by those that are working on you medically. And usually you want to add a copy, at least the healthcare directive and the healthcare durable power of attorney. Most doctors' offices want to keep a copy for their records, right? So if there is an emergency, that they can access those. And you'll probably know if you've been to the hospital or been admitted to the hospital for whatever reason or go in for surgery or something, they always ask, do you have a healthcare directive? And so you want to have it for that purpose too, and they'll usually take a copy. As with any document that we do for estate planning, these types of documents also need to be reviewed regularly. So you want to have a periodic review with your family oftentimes, or at least look at it yourself to make sure that these things that you're laying out in your healthcare directive, do you want to be taken off life support? Do you want to receive nutrition and hydration? Maybe that changed. It's interesting to me, in my practice, I've been practicing over 20 years now, and it typically comes down maybe 75 to 25 for people who want to have nutrition and hydration removed versus those who want to keep it. And usually the parties are, the 75+% people are saying, well, if I'm gone and I'm in a permanent vegetative state and I'm not coming back, why would I want to prolong that? So they said, take me off life support so I can die peacefully, right? The 25% has been people that are like, well, I don't want to starve to death because starving is painful. And there's other like religious types of things. Well, what if there's a miracle or something and I can come back? And, you know, notwithstanding the fact that if it wouldn't be a miracle, I don't know that the miracle is dependent on whether you're on nutrition and hydration or not. I think it's still a miracle. You know, those are sort of the categories. Recently, due to the technological advances, there's tech guys coming in that say, well, I want to keep that nutrition and hydration flowing because what happens if medical science changes? What happens if my brain can be replanted somewhere else, which is coming potentially? And so those guys are often saying, leave the nutrition and hydration on there, you know, so that I might be able to come back. So the tech guy is a new miracle man. So it's not just the highly religious, which is good. So you want to make sure you're reviewing these documents, though. Like I said, you want to make sure that if things change in your life, particularly with regards to people who you have in charge, if you have someone in charge that is no longer close to you or has maybe moved away, if it's a friend or sibling or child that's maybe moved away to a different place, they're not as local, it might be better to have a local person named as your proxy. So if those things are things you want to potentially change, if that's the difference, or if you aren't particularly close with the person anymore, you want to have someone that's close to you, that knows you, that regularly sees you or hears from you. So that leads us to choosing that healthcare proxy or attorney in fact under healthcare durable power of attorney. Selecting a reliable and trusted person is essential. You have to have that person, right? Because they're making these critical decisions with regard to your healthcare. They're like, okay, well, Bob's not doing great, and so he's appointed Sally, and Sally's not the sharpest gal, you know, or Jimmy's kind of slow. Maybe we don't want to have him be the healthcare guy. You know what I mean? And so you want to have someone that sort of can make those kinds of decisions and maybe has some experience or at least functional decision-making logic. I did a whole episode on selecting these important people like trustees and executors. It's episode 17 of the podcast. If you're wondering, well, what are longer items or longer list of items that I could use, episode 17 is really actually pretty good about finding that person. And once you name someone as your attorney in fact or medical proxy, make sure they know and make sure they have a copy, right? You want to communicate with that person. You want to communicate things maybe that aren't listed in those documents so that if there is a question or something that's subject to interpretation, that person can make that decision having had that conversation with you. So make sure that's laid out, right? Maybe have a conversation, go out to dinner, have them over for a party or something, like a short party. Then business after that. But, something where you can actually talk about what you want to have happen, right? So that there's no question. And if you're not sure, and if you're too shy to talk to them face to face, or it's hard for you to do, maybe write it down in a letter, a sort of a letter of intent. The document itself should give them the legal authority to do whatever they need to do. But if having that letter of intent would maybe make their decision-making process easier, it's a good idea. Though it wouldn't be legally binding necessarily, but it is something that can guide decision-making. So, and you also want to do this. So if you have a healthcare directive and you have certain wishes with regard to end-of-life care, so if you're in a permanent vegetative state or an irreversible coma and you want to have, if that's your situation, you want to have life support removed and you want to have nutrition removed and you want to have hydration removed and you don't want to have anything else. You want to communicate that with your family and loved ones so that they know, right? They know what you think and what your thoughts with regards to those kinds of things are. They should be informed about the existence of having this directive, right? They should know that you have these documents, and in many cases, they should know that they're not the one making that decision, right? Because the last thing you want is have your whole family showing up at the hospital and saying, well, I'm going to make a decision for Bob, whereas the whole time Sally's the one that's got the authority, right, under the document. So make sure you communicate that, particularly with the person that has it, of course. But then with your other family, too, that say, hey, I've made Sally my proxy for healthcare decision-making, and so what she says goes. I trust her, and I think she'll make the right decision. Not Jimmy. We don't want him on the list. And then finally, the other thing that is important about these advanced directives is they allow for a more personalized level of care, particularly with regard to end-of-life treatment. And they align these medical interventions that could be put in place by healthcare providers with your personal values and desires. So by having these documents clearly laid out and these discussions with your family and discussions with your medical providers, your personalized care level increases, right? It's so difficult these days in the medical world to get that personal care that we thought we used to have. The doctor that we knew, that knew our name, right? That we'd had for our whole life. These make that a little bit closer to that old standard. And these documents also, having your people know and your doctors know and your healthcare providers know, it helps avoid and eliminate these distressing medical interventions that you probably don't want, right? If you want to die peacefully in a permanent vegetative state or an irreversible coma, persistent vegetative state means you're not coming back. Irreversible means you're not coming back. So I'm not a doctor, of course, but that's what that means. That's what those words mean. Okay. So if you want that to happen, then you want to make sure that these documents are in place. So they're important, right? Maybe not sexy. Maybe not like, I'm going to win avoiding probate, right? I'm going to avoid probate with a trust, win. But the healthcare directive and advanced directives of healthcare durable powers of attorney make sure that some of the biggest problems that can arise outside of your estate getting contested or unhappy beneficiaries or people stealing money from you or something like that, the healthcare decisions can be the biggest problem that you might come across if you're not able to make those yourself. And that leads us to our story time, which is a famous story that I alluded to at the beginning of this podcast. I've been telling people this story for almost 20 years. When I was a new attorney, a young attorney, there was this gal, the story of Terry Schiavo. And many of you have heard this story. Most of my clients that I mentioned that are of a certain age at least have heard of Terry Schiavo in this case. And this was a case out of Florida. So here's what happened. So in 1990, Terry Schiavo, who at the time was 26 years old, fell into a persistent vegetative state after having cardiac arrest. 26. And there was a huge public battle between her parent and her husband. Her parents wanted to keep her on life support, which is probably understandable. She's 26 years old. But her husband said that she wouldn't have wanted to live her life in this artificially prolonged state if there was no hope for recovery. And so what happened was they had a lawsuit. So this case spurred emotional nationwide and international debate over the quality of life, right to die, and end-of-life issues. And so what happened was the courts initially sided with the husband, Michael, who said she wants to be removed, take the feeding tubes off. She was off life support. She had the feeding tubes on, though. But what happened was the state legislature in Florida passed a bill called Terry's Law that was signed by Jeb Bush, who was governor at the time, which gave them the authority to prevent the removal of the feeding tube. So they gave the governor of Florida the authority to remove the feeding tube. But after much back and forth, so they contested the validity of that law. And after much more court hearings and trials in both state and federal court, they finally sided again with the husband, Michael, and her feeding tube was removed, which ended this long struggle that she had. And she died at the age of 41. So like 16 years, 15, 16 years. So this story, what I tell people about this story is if you don't have this healthcare directive that says if I'm in a permanent vegetative state or an irreversible coma, take me off life support and take the feeding tube out or leave it in, right? If you don't have that and your family doesn't know what you want and there's a question, you could have a problem like this, right? You could have a Terry Schiavo style situation, which is not great. And it was a fiasco and everybody was sad, I'm sure. And nobody really won because Michael lost his husband, Michael lost his wife and her parents lost their daughter, right? Neither of them wanted her to go, but Michael, the husband, seemed to know and eventually won that his wife didn't want to have to be in that position and she didn't come back. So if you don't have that document, there's no tiebreaker. But if you do have the healthcare directive, there is a tiebreaker that says, hey, if there's a question as to what I want, this is what I want. And so, because the other thing about that is a healthcare durable power of attorney gives a person the ability to make that decision. That healthcare durable power of attorney, in most cases, the ones that I draft typically, say, if I'm in a permanent vegetative state, you can take me off life support, regardless of what that healthcare directive says. So you want to have that healthcare directive and you want to have that healthcare durable power of attorney so someone can come and make that decision. So there is no question. There's no legal battles, right? Anyway, so that's that. So I have these plans. We've got this new segment in the news or something good. I'm trying to find these things all the time, right? And so this week I've seen 2 videos on Instagram that talk about napping and how there's a Harvard study, they call it a new study, I don't know, about napping that basically says that taking 3 naps per week, 30 to 60 minutes, I believe, decreases your chance of a heart attack by 37%. And then that's backed up by a crazy number. It decreases the chance that men would have heart attacks by 68%. Men who took 3 naps per week, 30 to 60 minutes. And then there was another study that said people ages 35 to 45, if they take 1 nap a week, have a 32% decrease in heart attack or stroke or heart disease. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's something good, right? Because we're going to get on the napping train. We're going to nap, man. We're going to take naps. We're going to take 3 naps a week if we want to, right? Even if we take 1, we're going to go down 32%. So I went and I'm like, okay, I'm a lawyer, so I wanted to see if I could find the story or find the studies. Like, are these great studies? I don't know. I saw them on Instagram. I saw it twice on Instagram, different people saying the same thing. And it looked like they were saying it at different times. And it's interesting because they're both like doctor-style influencers. I can't remember who they are, but it doesn't seem... Anyway, I went to the internet to see if I could find these studies. And I found one study from Harvard from 2007 that I think is that first study. There's 1 billion studies on naps. And there's studies on naps that say it's good for your brain. And then there's studies on naps that say it's bad because it's going to give you diabetes and all these things if you nap too much. I don't know. So I think what the rule is on studies is you can almost always find what you're looking for unless it's done completely scientifically. So I'm not sure if taking naps is really going to help you. If it does, great. I'm all for it. I don't take enough naps. And I probably should start taking them. So maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's 3 times a week. If you like to take naps, comment in the comment section. I'm curious. Do you like to take naps? Is that something interesting to you? If I'm lucky, I might get like a nap once a week for a few minutes, but I don't know. Anyway. So if that's good, great. If not, I don't know. Because you can find the good and bad, right? You're going to find the good and bad in any of those studies. Well, it's going to reduce heart attacks and cardiovascular disease and all this stuff. It's going to make your brain better if you take a nap. But then, you're going to get diabetes and you're going to have circulation issues and all this stuff. So do your own research, I guess, is the moral of that story with regard to naps. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'd like to thank you for listening to today's episode of Legacy Talk. If you liked today's episode and would like to learn more, please like and subscribe for more great content. I've been your host, James Jones. To your legacy.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy Talk podcast by attorney James A. Jones. If you found today's episode helpful, we ask that you like and follow us on all major platforms so you don't miss out on the latest episode. If you have questions for Attorney Jones, reach out at info@joneslegacylaw.com or visit our website at joneslegacylaw.com. Join us again next week for another episode of the Legacy Talk podcast.